The first primary for the 2026 midterm elections happened last night, and the biggest story to emerge was the Texas win for James Tallarico. He now heads for the general election to try to flip a Texas Senate seat blue. It's something that Democrats haven't pulled off since the 90s, but it's looking likelier and likelier considering Trump and the overall party's extremely weak position heading into the midterms. But a story that you might not have heard about, that might actually be an even bigger story, is the Republicans' ability to meddle with the voting processes. Some backroom strategy made it so that a lot of people who went out to cast their constitutional right to vote were unable to. And just how that happened is worth examining so that it hopefully doesn't happen again during the midterms. One of the biggest stories to come out of last night, reported here in the Daily Beast, is that rising Democratic star James Tallarico won his primary against Jasmine Crockett, also a representative in Texas. Both of them ran super progressive campaigns centering issues like affordability and fighting back against billionaires. But Tallarico won out, in part because of an incident just a few weeks ago that helped propel him over the finish line. If you missed it, he was set to appear on Stephen Colbert's Late Show, but that episode was interrupted by a last minute order from Trump's FCC, which attempted to stop the interview from airing. However, it was put online the next day, and millions of people watched it, creating a mass push for him at the last minute. The Daily Beast reported that the Democratic candidates and groups backing them spent more than $30 million on advertising in this race, with Tallarico spending the vast majority of it, up to 24 million, and Crockett dropping about 5 million on these ads. Tallarico has gone viral repeatedly, not just for the Stephen Colbert interview, but also appearing on prominent podcasts like Joe Rogan. And the Daily Beast also reports that Democrats had a surge in early voting, with more than 1.5 million people voting in this primary, more than double the number of people who cast votes in the 2022 midterms when the governor's race was on the ballot. That's also more people than in the GOP primary, where 1.3 million voters decided. Now, as Democrats are attempting to take a Senate seat in Texas, that would be a massive victory to pull off, because the Daily Beast reports the last time they were successful in doing this was back in 1988, more than 30 years ago. However, in recent races in the Trump era, Texas Democrats have gotten closer and closer to accomplishing this. Back in 2018, during Trump's first term, Beto O'Rourke lost by just 2.5% to Ted Cruz. I'll never forget when Beyonce came out to endorse O'Rourke. Nonetheless, he didn't win, but they're gearing up for another chance at hopefully accomplishing the same thing. In fact, Politico referred to what happened last night in Texas as Democrats' dream scenario, because while Tallarico was able to earn more than 50% of the votes, making it so that there's no runoff election, the same wasn't true of the Republican primary. Now, there's going to be a runoff election on May 26th between Senator John Cornyn and State Attorney General Ken Paxton. A lot of Republicans, Politico reports, are fearing a scorched earth campaign that could seriously damage whoever wins. At the same time, a lot of Democrats view Tallarico as a better candidate for that November race, viewing him as more of a moderate than Jasmine Crockett. Jasmine Crockett also faced a lot of negative press right in the lead up to this election after her campaign kicked an Atlantic reporter out of a stop, and then she falsely accused that reporter of having been sued for defamation previously. Now, on the Republican side of the primary, Cornyn is showing some strength after previously trailing Paxton in the polls. He actually came slightly out on top of Paxton, but not enough to avoid a runoff election. And there was a massive amount of money spent in both primaries. But Republicans facing this new runoff election are going to have to spend even more time and resources to see who their eventual competitor will be. That's before we get into the final face-off between Tallarico and whichever Republican wins. But a story that happened last night that you might not have heard about is the chaos at the polls in Texas. And that chaos is something important to pay attention to, because it might be the playbook that Republicans are actually creating for the midterms themselves. Eliza Orlins, a career public defender, has this breakdown of what happened on her Substack, Objection Everything. She said what happened in Dallas County was not a glitch, And as she explained it, Republicans changed the rules, then stopped voters from being able to cast their ballots at the very last second. Basically, in Dallas County, there's been a system in place since 2019 where anyone can vote at any vote center in the county, regardless of where it is. Just whatever voting center is closest to them is one where they're able to cast a ballot. That's how it's worked for years. And so a lot of voters in Dallas thought that that was still the system now, but it's not. Based on disproven conspiracy theories about voting machines during the 2020 election, the Dallas County Republican Party was able to change the rules. First, they wanted to make it so that all ballots had to be counted by hand, but they didn't have the resources to actually pull that off. So instead, they decided to split polling locations based by precincts. Therefore, people who had voted at one polling location in previous years all of a sudden had a newly assigned precinct location that they had to go to. Here's how Eliza Orlins explained what happened. She wrote, by Tuesday afternoon, between 50 and 100% of voters arriving at some locations were being told they were in the wrong place. The Texas Democratic Party said around a third of all voters were having problems. A third of all voters. That is an absolutely enormous slice of the pie, 1 out of every 3 people who went to vote. The state's website, she continued, was giving people inaccurate locations. Voters were showing up to what they thought was a Democratic polling site in Irving, only to find out it was a Republican location, and then getting sent 20 minutes away. 66-year-old woman, Veronica Anderson, walked 2.5 miles to her voting location, only to be told there that she was at the wrong place and needed to go somewhere else. Eliza Orlins writes, that's who we're talking about when we talk about voter suppression. Real people. People who walked miles to exercise a right that's supposed to be protected. So immediately, Dallas County Democratic Party Chair Cardell Coleman filed an emergency petition, and a district court judge ordered that the polls had to stay open until 9 p.m. so that voters who went to the wrong locations could still cast their ballots. But then Ken Paxton threw a wrench in things. Ken Paxton is the Attorney General of Texas right now, and he'll be a part of that runoff election that's happening in a couple months. He filed an emergency motion to block that judge's order based on essentially a loophole. He said that the lower court judge didn't give his office the required notice before issuing the extension. And the Texas Supreme Court, which is dominated by Republicans, issued a temporary stay, which means they had to separate out and discard all ballots cast after 7 p.m. Eliza writes, those ballots are now in legal limbo. The court's order doesn't say what happens to them, it just says to separate them. Eliza's takeaway is that this was ultimately the point. She says, I need you to think about why you do this in a Democratic primary. You don't suppress votes in a primary to win the primary. Republicans aren't even on the ballot. But here's what you do gain. You weaken whoever comes out of it. You damage the eventual nominee. You shape the field and you get a test run for your playbook. So, as she illustrates throughout this piece, this chaos at the polls may have prevented a significant number of people from being able to cast their ballots, meaning it was a successful playbook and something that the Republicans could then weaponize in November. There are a lot of different strategies Republicans already have on the table, and likely even more that we don't know about, to cause chaos and shift the election outcome. That's corruption, plain and simple. It's entirely anti democratic and goes against the very founding principles of this country. But that's exactly what Trump and his party need to do now to win, because they are so organically unpopular. Trump's approval rating has never been lower, and his actions cast a negative light across the entire Republican Party. Voters, even in extremely red places, are so sick of this that we're seeing historic numbers, both in terms of the amount of people going out to vote and the amount of votes that Democrats have been getting. We're seeing the Democratic Party shift further to the left. We're seeing more progressives get elected. We're seeing Republicans cast out of offices that they've had a majority in for years. That is terrifying to the Republican Party. So, what are they going to do about it? Well, first, they're going to falsely accuse the Democrats of cheating, which is what Trump has been doing for years, ever since he rightfully lost the 2020 election. He came up with this whole fake mythology around voting machines, corruption, and stolen votes. None of it was true. It was disproven in court multiple times, but they're still using it as the rationale to change how voting works. They're attempting to pass legislation at the federal level and at the state level and even at the county level. Republicans are meddling and suppressing voters. It's so wrong, but they know that if they maintain their majority, they can get away with anything because that's exactly the playbook that Trump has been using this entire time. So when Trump accuses Democrats of cheating, it's actually just a total projection. Republicans are trying to cheat. They're using legal loopholes to do it, and they'll use every single trick in the book, including things that are technically illegal, knowing that it won't matter as long as they're able to get into office. Act first, fail to apologize later. No accountability for Trump, as we've seen time and time again. This should scare everyone because the future of the country and the world at large hangs in the balance of what's going to happen during the midterms. So it's so important to pay attention to stories like these so that people on the ground working in the election process, so that Democrats at every level of government, and so that advocates for free and fair voting can act now and prepare because there's going to be much more chaos to come. That's the only thing we know we can expect from Trump and his party for sure. James Tallarico will prepare now for his challenge in November. And Texas Democrats, for the first time in a long time, might have an actual chance at winning a state seat. But they won't have that chance if Republicans are able to completely dismantle and take over the election process, which is all that they're really trying to do. We can't let them get away with it, and we have to ensure free and fair elections for all.